So today we're going to continue to take a look at the alternative future of the world. We're now into part 5 of the series, and it's actually doing quite well. We're going to have some major events taking place today that could lead into a major global conflict, the largest of this series thus far. And before we get started, I would just like to ask you to please like and subscribe to the channel. The support is greatly appreciated. And yeah, let's get right into this. So we're actually going to start today with a war here in South Africa. So we have South Africa, the country, declaring war on Lesotho and Eswatini. Very quickly, these countries are taken out, but this does lead to a much larger conflict. We have Namibia, Botswana, and Mozambique all declaring war on South Africa. Almost immediately, their troops cross the border. They push all along the borders. And actually, at this point, we see Angola join the war on the side of South Africa, as well as Zimbabwe. We then have Zambia and Malawi joining side on the blue team, and the East African Federation. So this has quickly turned into a very large-scale war with two major powers, those being South Africa and East African Federation. Almost immediately, Angola's troops cross into the East African Federation, cutting them off from the sea in the west. South Africa pushes into Mozambique, pushing up along the coast, and Mozambique and Zambia push into Zimbabwe. And Zambia and the East African Federation also make a push into Angola. The East African Federation is now fully mobilized, and they push back Angola, almost completely out of their territory. And they also begin to push into their country from the north. We now have South Africa pushing out Namibia and Botswana out of their country, and starting their own invasions of the two countries. The East African Federation is fully liberated. They take Angola's exclave and begin a greater push into the country. Eventually, their two front lines meet up, and now they have one large front to worry about in Angola. The invasion of Zimbabwe is going well. They've pushed out from all around their borders and have nearly captured the country. South Africa ramps up their invasion of Botswana and Namibia as they push up along the Namibian coast, and they secure a very large front line pushing out from all along their borders. They've already captured the Botswanian capital, and they now spearhead towards Namibia's capital, eventually taking it. They take out large portions of southern Namibia, pushing up farther along their coast, taking out major cities, and they continue to push into Botswana. Eventually, the two countries do surrender. South Africa continues to push into Mozambique, continuing their campaign along the coast. Their capital was captured early, so they're not actually doing that well. South African troops arrive in Zimbabwe, and they push out the blue team troops. And then pushing across and cutting Mozambique in half. Eventually, the southern portion surrenders. The East African Federation continues their invasion of Angola, and they push along the coast trying to reach their capital. Eventually, they do take the city, and Angola begins to fall. So now the two sides are roughly cut in half, like that, and they're actually going to meet for peace now. And so in this peace treaty, we see that a lot actually changed in southern Africa. The country of South Africa annexed all of Lesotho and Eswatini and southern Mozambique, as well as all of Namibia and Botswana. Mozambique is left over to just the northern half, but they did get some land out of Zimbabwe. Zambia got land out of Angola and Zimbabwe, and the East African Federation took a lot of land out of Angola, as well as their exclave. Now we're actually going to take a break from the war, and we're going to move over here to China, where if we take a look at this alliance map, southern China is actually going to leave the WTO as they want to perceive neutrality. They're even going to do this by joining up with the rest of China. So now speaking of alliances, the CSTO is actually going to do some expanding. Another country is actually going to be joining them, but it's not going to be one that you think. And that's actually going to be South Africa. Other such countries that will be forming alliances is going to be Egypt, Sudan, and Eritrea, as well as Ethiopia. As you saw in the last video, these countries all went to war against Ethiopia and the African Federation, in which they won. They installed a new government in Ethiopia, and they're actually going to be joining in on the CSTO. So now the CSTO is actually doing a lot of expanding, especially into Africa, but another country that's actually going to be joining them is going to be Venezuela. I know, big surprise there. Another country is also going to be Nicaragua. And a few of these smaller Mexican countries are going to as well, such as these ones and this one. and maybe this northern one here. So now the CSTO is right on the doorstep of the US, and that's not really good, I don't think. This is actually going to lead to some more countries joining the Rio Pact, such as Guyana, Yucatan, Belize, and these other smaller Mexican countries. Mexico itself will actually stay neutral, however, but we'll see how that plays out for them in the long run. Another country to see joining the CSTO is actually going to be Pakistan. This angers India, but they will not do anything about it since they're in a neutral alliance. And Libya is actually going to be joining in on the CSTO as well. So now there's only one country in the Middle East that's not in an alliance, and that is actually Israel. In an earlier video, we did see that Israel wanted to join the WTO, but that is actually no more. They now want to join the Gulf Shield Pact, in which they actually are accepted. This is like 100 years in the future, so I'm sure these people can put aside their differences. They all kind of have common enemies. CSTO, obviously. And so they let Israel in. Now we do actually have some countries joining the WTO, those being Somaliland and the East African Federation. So just by looking at this alliance map, the world is very divided. We have one side, which is CSTO, and any allies they might have. Those include countries like Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. And then, of course, there's this WTO, which is allies like the Rio Pact and the Gulf Shield Pact. So now everything is really all set for massive global conflict. But where will it actually be starting? Hi, you thought I was going to start in Europe? No. It's actually going to be starting in a way that you would never expect it to. A major issue in the world right now is actually global trade. The Arctic ice caps have melted, and that allows for easier passage, mostly through the Northwest Passage, which is just kind of through there, goes through Canada. And even in the modern day, so that's 2024, countries are fighting over this. Not an active conflict, but the US and Canada aren't happy with each other over it. This is a real thing. The US claims it should be international waters, whereas Canada claims it should be, well, Canadian waters. And we actually have something you definitely did not expect. With the United States declaring war on Canada. I bet you never saw that coming. But how is this going to lead into the global conflict? Well, alliances. If you see here, both countries are in the WTO, but the US is also in the Rio Pact. And so this automatically will bring the entire Rio Pact into the war against Canada. We also have American Caribbean islands, such as Cuba and Puerto Rico. And I think they have Jamaica too. So now by looking at this, Canada kind of looks screwed. But wait, Canada's in the WTO, and you didn't see that the WTO came to the aid of the US. That's because... So now the sides are looking a little bit more fair. But wait, the Gulf Shield Alliance is actually going to be joining on the side of the US. A lot of these countries are major US non-NATO allies, and they're actually going to be joining this war on the side of the US. So now this gives NATO an entire other front to worry about. And if you also remember from previous videos, this island here is actually owned by the US, and so that's yet another front for them to worry about. And again, in South America, French Guiana is another front they gotta worry about. And so there's a lot going on here. But let's get started with the fighting. Almost immediately, American troops crossed into Canada, in southern Ontario, quickly taking out Toronto and Ottawa. They then push up into southern Quebec and into New Brunswick. They also make a landing on Vancouver Island, taking out Victoria, and then pushing in and taking Vancouver. Right on the US border, there's not really anything else. There's not really any other major cities, as a few of them are farther away, but they do push over the border from Minnesota in an attempt to take out Winnipeg. But up north, it's a different story. We have Canada taking out the southern portions of Alaska. They now take out Atoll Tail. That's just what I like to call it. And then I'll push along the coast, taking out any major cities. Elsewhere, we have Brazil taking out French Guiana, and we have the Gulf Shield Pact pushing into Turkey. This American island is actually taken quite easily by, well, all the countries over here. I just realized I forgot to color in Korea. They're on the WDO side. So not a ton has happened so far, but something big will happen. U.S. makes multiple naval landings in and around their Northwest Passage, as again that's mainly what they're fighting over, and so they make multiple landings in the northern Canadian islands and in the Arctic. These do go well because there's not very many people living up here, and begin to take over many islands. They make landings on mainland Canada and secure a very large presence here. Elsewhere, Canada actually makes a greater push into Alaska, taking out a lot of land in the south. They take these islands and take out the southern peninsula as well as the southern islands. They push up along the coast, and as far as I know, I don't really think there's any more cities. And there really isn't any more major cities, and so Canada really just pushes through to occupy this land. And now we have something huge happening. A few Iranian bullets may have crossed the border into Saudi Arabia, and maybe a few Russian into Poland, or maybe into Azerbaijan or Korea, or maybe a few Venezuelans shot a few Colombians. But either way, the CSTO now joins the war on their own side, and this creates multiple new fronts for both sides of the war already. Right away, we have Russia pushing into the Baltics, as they may or may not have already been ready for this war. We have them linking up Kaliningrad with Belarus and pushing into Poland. Ukraine pushes into Romania. Iran pushes into Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And Russia pushes into Azerbaijan. Ethiopia pushes into Somaliland, and they actually take the country with ease. And that's actually the first country to fall in this conflict, so yeah. From there, the northern African countries that are in the CSTO begin to push into the East African Federation. We have Manchuria pushing into Korea, and this goes quite well for them as they take out most of North Korea. And we have Russia making a landing on the northern Japanese islands. Like I said before, Venezuela begins to push into Colombia, and they take out a lot of land in the north. And Nicaragua begins to push into Costa Rica and Honduras. The Mexican countries are all taken over by the CSTO as they begin to push into the Yucatan country and Guatemala. The US actually pushes into the northern Mexican CSTO country, and they actually take out the country entirely. From there, we have Russia making a landing in Alaska, taking out this island as well. And their push actually goes quite successfully. They make another landing up here, and eventually the two meet up. Canada isn't very happy about this, and they ramp up their invasion of Alaska. They push out from all along their border and continue to push out along the Arctic Ocean. They now take out most of their coast and begin to take out much of the area in between. Russia sees this, and they begin to make a greater push into Alaska, and they now border the Canadian front lines. Eventually, Russia does take out the rest of Alaska, and they begin to push into Canadian occupied territory in southern Alaska. We actually have Canada pushing back the US in the north, kicking them off the mainland and making a landing on this larger island. They take back this island and push them out of this peninsula, taking back all of this land. They take back this island. Canada does make a greater push into this island, making landings on multiple different sides, but they don't quite fully take it. The US eventually takes over all of Vancouver Island, and then continue to push up in British Columbia. Canadians do push them back out in Manitoba, pushing them almost back to their border, eventually doing so, and then the Canadians push across the border themselves. We have Canada retaking Ottawa, and pushing back in southern Quebec, and they push them back in New Brunswick. Russia's push into the Balkans is actually going quite well, as they've taken out most of the countries. Make that all the countries. And they push into Poland. Ukraine's push into Romania is going quite well, but they do meet a stalemate here, however, as other European troops are arriving. Iran and Russia take out Azerbaijan, and begin to push into Turkey. So now Turkey has to fight a two-front war. The Gulf Shield Pact continues to push up into Turkish Syria, and they take over Cyprus. and they continue to push up along the coast. Iran makes a landing in the UAE, and they push along the coast, eventually making it into Saudi Arabia. They push out and take over all of Kuwait, and they push down the coast, meeting up with their other landing. From here, they establish a much greater front line against the Gulf Shield Pact. We also see Egypt pushing into Israel and Jordan, and eventually into Saudi Arabia. This forces the Gulf Shield Pact to take out much of their forces from Turkey, as they need to protect the homeland. Even by doing this, they don't push out the Egyptians. African CSTO members also make a landing in Southern Arabia, and they push along the coast in both directions. The push into the East African Federation is actually going quite well, and they spearhead towards these lakes. They capture Lake Victoria, and their front line is now quite large. We now actually see Algeria joining this war on the side of the CSTO, and we actually have the West African Union going into the war on the side of the WDO, and Niger joins the side of the CSTO as well. They're not really interested in the rest of the war, they just kind of want to expand their territory. And so they push out into the West African Union, into what used to be Nigeria. But Niger isn't just going to attack the West African Union. They now fully surround Ghana, and they actually declare war and invade the entire country. The entire world is shocked at this, as they now see that even if you stay neutral in this war, you're not safe from the CSTO. From here, they continue to push in, and they now meet up with Libya, where they invade and take out the entire country. And the rest of the world is now starting to see Niger's true ambitions. I also said this in a previous video that Niger may or may not have been lining the border with Cameroon. And now they actually declare war on Cameroon and take out the northern half of the country and begin to push out from all along their border. Eventually they do take out the entire country, and it doesn't go much better from there. They take out Equatorial Guinea, and really no country is safe. They continue to push around the coast of Africa, and eventually they do invade and capture the rest of the countries remaining. They push out from all along their borders, and Niger has a very long front line. So now we have Brazil and Guyana and Colombia pushing into Venezuela. They take out almost all of the country, and this forces them to take their troops out of Colombia. Eventually, the country does quit, but soon after, the country capitulates over to South America. With nowhere else to fight in South America, they're now shipping their troops up to Central America, where the CSTO is actually doing quite well. Nicaragua has reached the Panama Canal, and they've taken out almost all of Central America. Make that all. But now, with the arrival of South American troops, they do begin to push back, reaching the border of Costa Rica, and now pushing past. But now something huge is actually going to be happening. Brazil actually switches sides of this war, and they actually join the CSTO. So this changes the occupation of French Guiana, and now they work to re-liberate Venezuela. They do this quite easily, as the other countries here are really no match for Brazil. And from there, they take out Guyana and begin an invasion into Colombia. Central America is retaken by the CSTO, and Colombia now has a much greater front line to worry about. Eventually they surrender, as they are too overwhelmed. Brazil also begins an invasion into Argentina and Paraguay, as well as into Peru. We now actually see Bolivia joining the CSTO, as we want to get back at Chile. We have Brazil taking out Suriname, even though they're a neutral country. And then they begin to take out American Caribbean islands, as well as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They take out Puerto Rico, and they begin an invasion of Cuba, taking out the island quickly. After that, they make a landing in southern Florida, and now the Americans are really worried. So you may have noticed that the CSTO seems quite powerful in this scenario, but nobody knows where they're getting their supplies from. Is it just the sheer amount of countries that have recently joined? Nobody really knows. Iran and Russia scale up their invasion of Turkey and begin to push through much faster than before. We see Finland pushing into Russia, taking out the Kolan Peninsula, as this region was mostly unprotected, and they begin to push out towards St. Petersburg. Russia and Manchuria continue to take out Korea and Japan. Eventually, Korea surrenders, and Manchuria makes a landing in southern Japan, taking out their side of the islands. And eventually, Japan does surrender over to the CSTO. From here, they now ready their troops to go down into Southeast Asia and Oceania. Israel is now fully taken over by the CSTO, as well as Jordan. Their occupation in Turkey is taken over by them, and they push into Saudi Arabia. They meet up with their front in the west, and continue to take out Southern Arabia. Eventually that country does surrender, and now Saudi Arabia is completely surrounded, and they too surrender. So now, with Bolivia's help, they push into Argentina and Paraguay, as well as Peru, and establish a much greater front line. They now take over all of Paraguay, and now push into Argentina and taking out their capital. They go down the Chilean coast, as they don't really want to go through the Andes Mountains, and they actually invade Ecuador in order to gain access to Peru. From here, they push along the Peruvian coast. They push up from the north as well as the south, taking out the entire coast, and eventually the entire country does surrender over to the CSTO. So now we see Afghanistan and Turkmenistan officially joining up with the CSTO in this war, as well as one other country. Can you guess what it is? It's actually going to be China. And the West can see now that they might have been the source of all the extra equipment that the CSTO has had in this war. And so now, as the countries down here were not prepared for this, Taiwan is taken out, and they begin to push into northern Vietnam. They take back this island, and they continue to push into Vietnam. Now this goes quite well for them, as they really were not expecting an invasion. And eventually, after just a few weeks, Vietnam surrenders, and they make a landing in the northern Philippines. And it is now that we actually see Argentina switching sides as well, as they see that they will probably win the war on this side. From there, they completely take out Chile, and the country surrenders in a matter of days. From here, they invade Mexico, taking out the country relatively quickly, because again, they were not expecting an invasion. And I just realized that it's really just America that's left for the red team, and we actually have them being completely kicked out of Canada, at least in the south. In British Columbia, we have them pushing back, kicking them out of the mainland, but they aren't quite able to take back Vancouver Island just yet. Up north, multiple landings are made on this island, and eventually do take it back from the Americans. We now have Canadian troops pushing into New England, and America is now heavily losing this war. They're contemplating switching sides, but it's too late for that now. Canada secures around the Great Lakes, and they take out all of New York. They now threaten their capital, and with the help of other WDO countries, they eventually take out Washington, D.C. We now see Vancouver Island being fully liberated, and the Canadians now push down into Washington State. American troops are really losing their morale now, as the CSTO just took back the northern Mexican country. And from here they make a huge push into what used to be northern Mexico, before reaching up with Texas. And they also make landings in southern Baja California, eventually taking out the peninsula and meeting up with their other front line. They push around the Gulf of Mexico and up through Florida, eventually to take out the entire Gulf, and they push up the American coastline. Seeing the end of the war is coming soon, Russia ramps up their invasion of Eastern Europe in order to secure as much territory as possible. They take out most of Turkey, as well as most of Poland, and begin to invade into Slovakia and Hungary. Romania is almost completely captured, and the country now surrenders, and they push into Bulgaria. Eventually, Turkey's capital is captured, and this ensures the downfall of the country, as Russia quickly takes over all of it. From here, they push into Greece, and make a landing in the south, taking out Athens, and then Greece soon surrenders. From here, they push up into the Balkans, taking out Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Albania, and pushing up to Croatia. Take out Serbia, and Hungary and Croatia and Slovenia all surrender, same as Slovakia. We now see the surrender of Poland, and I just realized Algeria never pushed into Morocco. That would have happened a while ago, so probably look something like this. They probably push up into Spain as well, kind of like that, taking out these islands here. And they push up into Portugal. The CSCO takes out all of what used to be Niger, and continue to push out from Algeria. They take out most of northern Morocco, and the country surrenders. Another country to surrender is the West African Union. And we now see the Philippines surrendering, as China has taken out most of their islands. And we also see Russia pushing back Finland. We have Canada pushing down the western coast of the US, reaching down into California. And they also make a push out from Alberta and Saskatchewan. They push down along the Rockies, as well as the eastern coast, meeting up with the CSTO front line. Now the CSTO makes a greater push into the US, taking out most of Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, and Southern California. It's now that we actually see the US surrendering over to the WDO. You might also be wondering about why, but they were taken by the CSTO a while ago. I just forgot to say that. CSTO pushes into Austria and Czechia, as well as Eastern Germany, taking out these countries. They also make a landing in southern Italy, as well as these islands here. They take out most of southern Spain and all of Portugal. Pretty soon, Spain, Austria, and Italy all surrender. And it is now that these major countries all surrender that they will finally meet for peace. And so in this peace treaty, the world has been changed forever. Starting over here in North America, where the war actually started, you can see that Canada actually got a lot of land out of the US, including most of the northern states, Michigan, and a lot of New England. They also received most of Alaska, but the remainder of it also went over to Russia, who finally has their claims back. Well, not fully, but in the south of the US, where the CSCO had gained a lot of ground, we see Florida is independent. We see California is independent, but they've decided to remain neutral. We have a new Louisiana country, and many other new countries that have all joined with the CSTO. A lot of the Mexican countries have annexed a lot of their neighbors, and Nicaragua annexed most of the countries surrounding it. Cuba is now independent, and they also have Jamaica, and then Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico are all one country. Venezuela gained a lot of ground in Colombia and Guyana. Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador all united together after the war, and Brazil got a huge chunk out of Peru. They also annexed all of Suriname and French Guiana. Bolivia got a piece of land out of Peru and Chile, finally getting their access to the ocean, and Argentina annexed all of Chile. Nothing happened with South Africa, but Sudan and Ethiopia both got land out of the East African Federation. Nigeria annexed all of Cameroon and Equatorial Guinea, and they now spread all along the coast. Niger has been released, but not before Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya got pieces out of it. The West African Union still exists, they're just a very smaller portion of what they used to be. Algeria also got some land out of northern Morocco. Over in the Middle East, Egypt got a lot of land out of Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Iran annexed all of Kuwait and a lot of Saudi Arabia. They also took land down here in the south, where the UAE and Oman used to be. Syria has been released, Cyprus is released, and Turkey is reduced to mostly what they have today. Thrace, Greece, and Bulgaria have all been united into one puppet state. Russia and Iran split Azerbaijan. Ukraine got a lot of land out of Romania and Poland. We saw the unification of Belarus and Russia also annexed all the Baltic states, as well as some of Poland. We see the return of Yugoslavia, plus Albania, and the return of Czechoslovakia. Iberia has all been turned into one country, and they've all been turned into puppet states for the CSTO. The only gains for the blue team against the CSTO was up here in Finland, and so they get to keep most of the Kolan Peninsula. We see Russia annex the northern island of Japan, Manchuria annex all of Korea, and we also see that Japan is now part of the CSTO. China annexed all of Taiwan, this island down here they got back from America, and then annexed all of Vietnam. They also now control the Philippines. And so that is now it for the peace treaty. Now, I'm not going to do anything else for this video, but do please stay around because I have something I want to tell you. First of all, I would like to thank you all for your support. We've gained almost 2,500 subscribers this year. I just wanted to let you know that my yearly goal now is for 5,000 subscribers by the end of this year. And so I'd really appreciate it if you help me to get there. That's going to be it for today's video. So thank you all for watching, and if you could please help me reach my goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of this year, I'd really appreciate that. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next video.